I didn't expect the first glass of wine at my engagement dinner to land on my chest. But there I was, soot-soaked, stunned, while her mother smiled and said, "Consider that a disinfectant, dear. We don't want germs in the family business." Everyone laughed, except me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't being welcomed into a family. I was being appraised. Her name was Celeste Dupont, CEO of the Beaulieu Group, a sprawling family-run investment firm headquartered in Toronto, with deep roots in luxury retail real estate and politics. My fiancée, Camille, was her youngest daughter. And me, I was just a Montreal-born software engineer who happened to build a successful B2B logistics platform. To them, I was either a lucky outsider or a calculated threat. I wiped my lap dry with the dinner napkin, forced a smile, and said nothing. Not to Camille, not to the guests. Just nodded like I understood the joke. But inside, something twisted. The next morning, I received a calendar invite from Celeste's assistant. Breakfast, 8 a.m., Bay Street office. No subject, no agenda. Her office overlooked the Toronto skyline, cold, modern, full of steel and silence. Celeste offered me espresso, then got to the point. "In our family, we believe in equal contributions. Camille will inherit a portion of the family fund. We'd like you to show commitment, $750,000. It would be invested through our New York venture arm. Symbolic, of course." Symbolic. I looked her in the eyes. "What happens if I decline?" She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you're not ready to join the family." Camille never mentioned this, never warned me. That night I asked her about it. She brushed it off like a misplaced receipt. "My mother just likes testing people. She did the same with my brother-in-law." I tried to believe her, but when I replayed the dinner in my mind, I noticed something else. Her silence. Her mother's smile. The look exchanged between her uncles when the wine was spilled. It wasn't a test. It was theater. And I was the only one who didn't know my role. Back in Montreal, I started noticing little things. An invoice from DuPont Group Consultants listed under my fiancé's name. A family fund investment deck with my tech startup mentioned as a potential soft partner. Camille said it was nothing, just planning ahead. I said nothing, but I started documenting everything, because there was something my late grandfather once told me. If someone asks you to pay for love, they're not selling love. They're selling control. And I'd worked too hard to be owned by anyone. I first saw her speak at the Mars Discovery District in Toronto. She stood behind the podium in a simple navy blue blazer, no flashy jewelry, no PR smile. Just poise. Presence. Purpose. Her name was Camille Gauthier, and she was giving a talk about redefining AI supply chains for sustainable logistics. The topic was dry. The delivery was anything but. Her voice was calm, confident, like she knew exactly what she was building and didn't care whether the room caught up or not. She didn't oversell herself. She didn't fill silence with nonsense. She let her ideas breathe. The slide behind her showed a model of predictive routing that cut emissions by 27%. Someone in the audience asked if that number was even realistic. Camille smiled, not mockingly, not defensively, just assured. "It's not a projection," she said. "It's a correction. The system's been wasteful by design. All I'm doing is redesigning the incentive." That was the first moment I felt it. Not attraction, not admiration, recognition. She was solving a technical problem, sure, but she was also issuing a quiet indictment of everything status-driven. And I'd spent years building things that looked great on paper, but felt hollow in the gut. When the session ended, I didn't rush up to meet her. I waited outside the auditorium, pretending to check my phone. I wasn't nervous. I was aware that if I spoke to her, I'd need to bring something real. She walked out alone, holding a portfolio covered in sticky notes. I stepped forward, introduced myself. "Nathan Burke," I said. architecture, and interface design. She tilted her head, curious. Do you design buildings or systems? I said I try to make sure people don't feel like furniture inside either. That made her laugh, not politely, genuinely. It was the first of many times I'd watch her laugh with her whole face. Not the kind of laugh that asked to be liked, the kind that meant she was already okay whether you liked her or not. We ended up getting coffee at a corner cafe on College Street, talked about her work, mine the overlaps, the frictions. She told me how her father used to fix broken radios with dental tools because he said precision came from patience. I told her how my mother always opened the windows before arguments so the neighbors wouldn't hear. We didn't try to impress each other. We simply showed up as we were. That evening, as I watched her disappear into a cab, I knew something quietly irreversible had begun. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a door that once opened couldn't be closed again. After that first meeting, things didn't move fast. Camille wasn't someone who rushed anything, not relationships, not decisions, not feedback. She was deliberate but never hesitant. I liked that. I had spent years in boardrooms where people talked fast to cover the fact that they hadn't thought deeply. With Camille, there was silence sometimes, but never emptiness. We began spending weekends sketching out crossover ideas where architecture met algorithms. I showed her my draft designs for an office renovation in downtown Montreal. She pointed to a hallway and asked, "Why is that a corridor instead of a gathering space?" I'd never thought of it that way. She hadn't studied architecture, but she understood flow of people, of energy, of trust. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about friction. Soon after, she invited me to consult on her company's office redesign in Waterloo. She didn't want something pretty. She wanted something that made her team feel like they were building the future, not performing for the present. So I opened up the walls, added natural light, live greenery, acoustic insulation. No corner offices, no fake open space, just intentional design, real collaboration. She returned the favor in ways I hadn't expected. My firm, Burke Interface, was growing too fast. Hiring outpaced culture. The back-end systems groaned under pressure. Camille sat with my operations lead, and in 2 afternoons, mapped out a restructuring plan that reduced staffing bloat by 20% and shortened delivery cycles by 5 weeks. She didn't just make it leaner, she made it smarter. I didn't ask. She just did it. We weren't trying to impress each other. We were trying to build something that worked, together. There was a moment I remember distinctly, a meeting with a high-profile biotech client. I'd brought Camille in to pitch a hybrid development model that combined my spatial design with her logistics algorithms. The client, older dismissive, spoke only to me at first. Camille didn't flinch. She waited, took notes, and then when the man paused for breath, she slid a diagram forward. It was a real-time simulation showing how their current system hemorrhaged money during transit lags. He leaned back. "Where did you get this data?" She looked him in the eye and said, "Your quarterly report. Page 16. You just didn't look." He didn't say another condescending word for the rest of the meeting. Afterwards, in the parking garage, she leaned on the car door and asked, "Do you think we scare people?" I said, "Only the ones who benefit from dysfunction." That was the rhythm of us. No fireworks, no titles, no labels. Just shared clarity. We trusted each other more than we trusted our own fields. She could spot a flaw in a financial model faster than I could notice a cracked support beam. I could identify interpersonal tensions in her team before they turned into bottlenecks. We never said we were in love. We just lived like it. Looking back, I think that was the danger. We built so much together so smoothly that I didn't notice when some things began to tilt slightly imperceptibly until the cracks turned into fault lines. But back then, it felt like nothing could break. The proposal wasn't planned. Not really. We'd flown to Iceland for a week, partly business, partly escape. Camille had just closed her third fund cycle. I had wrapped a 12-month renovation for a hospital group. We were both exhausted, in the way only purpose-driven people get exhausted, quiet, stretched, and yet weirdly fulfilled. We needed air, space, silence. On our fifth night, we drove into Thingvellir National Park. No agenda, just her rented Land Rover, an old playlist, and wool blankets in the back. There were no streetlights, no buildings, just the vast dark, and a sky that didn't feel real. I remember glancing at her profile as she looked up, her breath forming soft clouds, her eyes reflecting green aurora. That was when I reached into my coat. The ring wasn't flashy, just a simple titanium band with a slender ridge down the middle. I hadn't even bought it specifically for that trip. I'd had it for weeks, waiting for something. Not a plan, just a moment. I handed it to her. No speech, no knees in snow, no build-up. Camille. I said I want to build the rest of my life the same way we build our work, deliberate, grounded, and real. Will you? She didn't gasp, didn't cry. She just smiled, took the ring, and slipped it on. I don't need anything else, she said. Just this, just you. We didn't call anyone, didn't post. We stayed out there for hours talking about our childhoods, our old failures, what scared us. She told me she's still worried about turning into her mother, ambitious, but alone. I told her I sometimes felt I was just copying what I saw in my dad, working to avoid being vulnerable. It was the most honest night of my life. Later, back at the cabin as she made tea, and I watched her from the couch, a strange thought entered my mind. I remember it so clearly. I thought, this is the last time I'll ever feel uncertain in love. And I believed it. With everything in me, I believed it. That thought clung to me. In the weeks after we returned to Canada, things moved fast. We merged our consulting arms into a joint venture, bought a small lake house outside of Kingston, talked wedding timelines, guest lists, even baby names on long drives. We weren't the kind of couple to lose ourselves in fantasy. But for a few months, it really did feel like the future was just a series of well-planned steps, all in sync, all secure. I didn't know, then couldn't have known that those months were the beginning of a timeline someone else was already redrawing, quietly, strategically, without me. Back then, the skies were still clear, and I was still someone she smiled at, not someone she prepared for. But I would remember that night in Iceland forever. The cold, the stars, the way she whispered, "Just you." It would be the sentence I'd return to again and again once everything broke. I didn't go looking for dirt. It found me quietly in the break room, where whispers carry louder than intentions. At the Beaulieu Foundation's annual networking mixer, I overheard a name I hadn't heard in years. Amélie Gagnon. Once engaged to Claire's older brother, Luc. She'd founded an impressive biotech startup back in Montreal, then vanished. No LinkedIn, no news, no trace. My curiosity got the better of me. I typed her name into my private business research platform. The results were unsettling. Amélie had sold her shares in her company within 2 months of getting engaged to Luc. Then nothing. No new ventures, no board seats, not even a podcast appearance. For someone once hailed as the rising mind of medtech, that silence was deafening. It wasn't just Amélie. Gabrielle Thériault, once married to Claire's cousin Vincent, was co-founder of an AI platform for remote education. She exited her role just weeks after joining the Beaulieu family. Another trail gone cold. I began to see a pattern. Women who entered the Beaulieu orbit came in like comets, bright, ambitious, unmistakable, and exited like whispers, as though someone had dimmed their light. At Sunday dinner, I tried to bring it up lightly. "Whatever happened to Luc and Amélie?" I asked, as I helped Claire's mother, Colette, serve the poulet rôti. Her ladle paused midair. Amélie wasn't the right fit. Fit? I tilted my head. Henri, Claire's father, barely looked up from his glass of Bourgogne. Family comes first. Always has. If someone doesn't understand that, they don't stay long. Claire said nothing. Her silence was heavier than either parent's comment. After dinner, I found her folding napkins in the kitchen. I leaned in and whispered, "What did he mean? Doesn't understand family." She pressed a crease too hard. "Don't read into it." "I'm not reading. I'm asking." "Mark," she said, her voice brittle. "My dad doesn't like women who make too much noise." I paused. "You mean women who run companies?" She didn't answer, but her eyes, those steady gray eyes that usually anchored me, looked away. The next day I called an old colleague who had briefly worked on a logistics optimization project with Gabrielle. He told me Gabrielle's departure wasn't voluntary. Beaulieu Inc. had conditions, he said. Unwritten ones. The kind you can't say aloud but everyone feels. She couldn't keep her company and keep the marriage. So she chose peace. Peace. What kind of peace demands the erasure of a life's work? By now I wasn't sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elise's laugh when I pitched her. My first startup idea heard Gabrielle's voice presenting her AI tool to the federal grant panel, remembered Amélie's sharp rebuttal to a VC who underestimated her. And yet, they were all gone. Silenced by a system wrapped in linen napkins and heirloom silverware. I sat across from Claire that evening, staring at my pad. Tie, but tasting nothing. "I don't want to lose you," I said, finally. She reached across the table, her hand warm. "You won't." "Then tell me the truth," I said. "Did your father give you conditions?" She hesitated. "Not exactly," she said. "But he expects proof that the person I marry can hold their weight." I let out a breath. "By weight, you mean money." She nodded barely. "It's not about love for him. It's about alignment. About legacy." Legacy. Another word for control. I finished my meal in silence, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Because I had a legacy too, and I wasn't about to let anyone erase it. It started with a text from Claire. "Dad wants to have coffee with you. Just you. Says it's a family tradition." The word tradition had begun to feel less like heritage and more like a leash. But I agreed. Maybe part of me still wanted to be liked. Or worse, accepted. We met at Café Mirabelle, a quiet corner spot in Outremont, where the Beaulieus had apparently held countless informal chats. Henry was already seated, sipping a double espresso like he had nowhere else to be. He didn't stand when I arrived. "Mark," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thank you for making the time." He never asked how I was doing, never asked about work or what projects excited me. He went straight in. "You've built a promising business," he said. "Clean books. Very clever. But I imagine growth requires resources, funding, networks." I nodded cautiously. "We're actually expanding into healthcare analytics. We're closing a new seed round now." He raised his eyebrows, but it wasn't admiration. It was calculation. "Claire tells me you've never taken family money." "That's correct." "Why?" "Because I didn't want to owe anyone leverage over what I built." Henri smiled, but not the kind that reaches the eyes. "Mark, everything in life is a trade. Power, love, business. Nothing is truly independent. Even you." He leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was revealing a secret. "When you marry Claire, you'll inherit more than a woman. You'll inherit expectation. That means showing the family you're not just talented, but serious, durable, intentional." I kept my face still. "What does that mean, practically?" He slid a small envelope across the table. I didn't touch it. An invitation, he said, to join our investment consortium. Beaulieu Partners. You'll co-invest in a series of acquisitions this year. 7-figure buy-ins. We want to know who you are, not just as Claire's fiancé, but as a man. I took a long sip of coffee. You think love requires a buy-in? Henry chuckled. Love is naive. Marriage is policy. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I wanted to flip the table or walk away in silence. I don't need validation from a boardroom to be worthy of your daughter, I said evenly. Worthy, he repeated like it was a foreign word. This isn't about worth. It's about value. What you bring to the family and what you're willing to risk to keep it. I left the envelope untouched. When I told Claire that evening, she didn't look surprised. She was cutting vegetables for dinner, and her knife didn't pause. He means well, she said. Claire, he basically told me to buy my seat at the table. She looked up, her voice soft. I told you he needs to know you're stable, that you won't collapse under pressure. Or run. I've built my company from nothing. Why does none of that count? Because it wasn't done his way, she said. And that was the beginning of the slow unraveling when I realized love alone might not be enough. Not when the gatekeepers of legacy carried checkbooks in one hand and silent contracts in the other. I began to wonder, was I building a future with Claire or being assessed like a venture? After the conversation with Henri, something shifted in me. Or maybe something cracked. I didn't want to admit it right away. Not to myself, not to Claire. But I began noticing how often I was the one bringing things up, real things, and how often she chose the quiet path, the path of least resistance, as though she could keep peace by keeping distance. The following weekend, we were at her family's chalet in the Laurentians. A snowy, perfect postcard of a place with lake views and vintage furniture that looked like it belonged in a movie about old money. Claire was curled up on the couch, reading a hardcover biography of some forgotten Canadian Prime Minister. I sat beside her and said, I think your dad wants me to prove I belong. She didn't look up. He just wants to know you're serious. I am serious. I want to build a life with you. But I don't think your father's version of serious has anything to do with us. It's about him. About his empire. His rules. She turned a page. You're reading too much into this. No, Claire. I don't think I'm reading enough. He asked me to invest $1 million just to prove I'm worthy of being with you. Do you think that's normal? She finally set the book down, but didn't meet my eyes. It's not about the money, Mark. It's about legacy. You marry into this family. You don't just marry me. You join something larger. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Her silence was louder than any argument. Over the next few days, I kept trying casually, carefully to ask questions about the women who used to be part of the Beaulieu story. Her older brother's ex-wife, a former art curator, the middle sister's girlfriend, who once ran a non-profit. Each of them had disappeared from family gatherings, like they'd never existed. Where are they now? I asked once gently. Claire answered with a shrug. Some people don't adapt. Adapt. That word. It hung in the air like smoke from a candle that had just been blown out. It implied failure on their part, not on the family's rigidity. And I realized with a sinking feeling that Claire didn't question the system. She grew up in it. To her, the silence was normal. Expected. One night, I found an old photo album on the bookshelf in the chalet's study. I flipped through page after page, Christmases, birthdays, graduation ceremonies. Claire always smiling, always polished. But there were faces that seemed to fade. One woman beside her brother in 2015. Gone in later years. Another beside her sister in 2018. Vanished without caption. Erased, I asked Claire again. Do you know why they left? She gave me a tired look. They couldn't compromise. That word again, Compromise, adapt, prove, invest. As if love were a transaction, an entrance fee to be measured in silence and submission. It was that night I wrote in my journal for the first time in a long time. I am not here to pass an audition. I am not a draft pick. I am a person who loves her, and I'm slowly becoming someone she no longer sees. Claire and I still laughed. We still kissed. But somewhere beneath the surface a canyon was forming, and neither of us was brave enough yet to ask how deep it went. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was pouring myself a coffee in the office kitchen when the notification buzzed on my phone. An email. Subject, re-strategy if Marc declines. It had been accidentally forwarded to my inbox by Claire. I opened it before I even had time to think. It was from Henri. If he doesn't agree. It read, "We still have means of maintaining influence. Claire, don't worry. The structure ensures that Arbor Analytics will need us more than we need him." My blood turned cold. There was no mistake, no misinterpretation. He was referring to me. And not just me, but my company, my vision, my life's work, as if it were just a pawn on their board. And Claire. She didn't push back, not in the email chain, not in any of the 10 responses. The last one from her read simply, "Understood." I sat at my desk reading those lines over and over. Understood. A word that carried centuries of obedience. It was the silence of consent. And it hit me harder than any insult could have. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not even the night after. I started saving the email, downloading every attachment, printing everything. Quietly, methodically. A week later, Beaulieu Textile sent a technical inquiry to our head of infrastructure. They were requesting back-end access to our data engine, citing integration efficiencies as the reason. It was beyond audacious. It was strategic encroachment. I knew it wasn't Claire's doing directly, but she knew. She had to know, and she didn't stop it. At home, she acted as if everything was fine. We went to dinner at her favorite little bistro in Westmount. She told me about a new campaign pitch she was leading. I listened, nodded, smiled. But my chest was tight. My fingers twitched with a kind of silent fury I wasn't used to. She asked, "You okay?" "Just tired," I said. I wasn't tired. I was calculating. Because now I knew this wasn't just about me and Claire. It was me and my boundaries against a family who saw love as leverage, trust as a tactic. And the one person I wanted to believe in, the woman I thought I knew, was already fluent in their language. 2 days after the technical inquiry, I received another email this time, addressed directly to me. It was from someone in legal at Beaulieu Textile, masked under courteous language and corporate formality. They were hoping to establish a more transparent workflow between our two firms, and to do so, they proposed direct administrative credentials to our financial reporting tools, particularly the proprietary budget simulator Arbor had built in-house. Not just view access modification access. They framed it as a mutual audit safeguard. I read that phrase 3 times. Mutual. We weren't even legally bound beyond a strategic collaboration. They had no board seat, no equity, just influence steeped in generational confidence and whispered expectations. And they wanted more. I forwarded the email to my CTO, Marc-Antoine, with one line, "Do not reply." He called me 10 minutes later. "Are they serious?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He said, "If we give them this, we're no longer independent." I know I said. But what I didn't say was that I was already considering what independence really meant when the person I shared a bed with was quietly collaborating with those asking to access the veins of my company. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling in our plateau apartment. Claire slept beside me, peaceful, trusting, or pretending. I thought about the first time I brought her into Arbor's prototype room, how excited she'd been to see our predictive model for clean energy procurement. She'd called it revolutionary. I believed she meant it. But now I didn't know what she meant when she said anything. The next morning, I called a meeting, not with my full team, just 4 people I could trust. Marc-Antoine, our head of data security, my general counsel, and Leia, who had helped me incorporate Arbor in the first place. I told them plainly, we're under soft invasion, no alarms, no lawyers yet. But I want you all to start documenting everything. Dates, names, phrases. Leia raised an eyebrow. You think Claire knows I hesitated? Then I said, she hasn't stopped it. That was enough for them. No more questions. I went back to my office, closed the door, and stared at the whiteboard I used for planning upcoming sprints. Suddenly, none of it mattered. Not the product launch, not the investment round, not even the pending partnership with the federal agency we'd been courting for months. Because if I lost control of Arbor, I'd lose everything, and I wouldn't even be able to say I didn't see it coming. I started a new folder on my desktop, quiet files, password encrypted, mirrored to a cloud nobody knew about. This wasn't a war, not yet. But it was no longer just business, either. It was personal now. I didn't confront Claire. I didn't accuse her, raise my voice, or even change my tone. That would have been expected, emotional, reactive, easy to frame as instability. Instead, I did the most dangerous thing I could in that moment. I acted exactly the same. We still went out for dinner on Thursday with her friends in Old Montreal. I still asked about her latest ad campaign with the boutique firm downtown. I still laughed when she teased me about forgetting to buy oat milk. But every interaction felt like theater, and I was exhausted from acting. Behind the scenes, I prepared. I started reviewing every document we'd shared with Beaulieu Textile since the beginning of our collaboration press releases, API gateways, shared Slack channels, project briefs. I flagged anything that gave them even a sliver of leverage. I made notes. I cross-checked timestamps. I found inconsistencies requests from their side that didn't match our logs. Tiny gaps in version histories, metadata that didn't belong. I called a friend of mine, Eric, a cybersecurity consultant I'd met through Concordia's startup incubator 5 years earlier. I told him I needed an audit, not for legal protection, but for knowledge. Quiet knowledge. He asked no questions. He just said, I'll start tonight. At work, I held firm. I didn't respond to Beaulieu's repeated follow-ups. I told my team to act busy, to delay every answer with vague professionalism. Tell them we're reevaluating system architecture, I instructed. It'll buy us 3 weeks. Meanwhile, I scheduled a one-on-one with our main fund manager, a woman named Adira Sharpfair, and unaffiliated with Beaulieu. I didn't give her the full picture, but I hinted. There may be some turbulence ahead, I told her. But I need you to trust me if I make a sudden shift in strategy. She looked at me carefully. Are you expecting sabotage? I took a long pause before replying. I'm expecting pressure, and I don't bend easily. She nodded once. Let me know if it becomes war. That night back at home, Claire handed me a glass of wine as we sat on the couch. To us, she said with a gentle smile. I clinked my glass against hers. To clarity, I said. It was a quiet toast. One she didn't question. But I meant every word. I wasn't chasing revenge. Not yet. I wasn't sure what I wanted besides safety for my company, for my values, for the version of myself that had built Arbor from nothing but a rejected provincial grant and a stack of open-source code. My father used to say, you don't need to fight every battle, just the ones they don't expect you to win. I didn't know if I would win this one, but I was choosing it, deliberately, silently. And soon I would stop pretending. The email came on a Friday. Not just any Friday, the day I was supposed to finalize the Beaulieu contract for Phase 3 expansion. I was in the office early, the building still quiet. That rare moment when I could hear the hum of servers and my own thoughts. I was just finishing my coffee when a Slack message popped up from one of Claire's junior developers, Simon. He was part of the integration team working closely with us on shared systems. He'd meant to send a project summary to Claire. Instead, he sent it to me. The document was titled, Meeting Notes, Strategic Alignment. I clicked absent-mindedly, assuming it was something mundane line items, API discussion, maybe a permissions update. It wasn't. Halfway down the page, there it was, a note tagged, Private. Henri to Claire. If Marc pushes back, your father will handle it. Your role is to keep him aligned emotionally. He trusts you. Use that. Do not let him derail the strategy. I stopped breathing. Not metaphorically. Literally. For a moment, my chest froze. My vision narrowed. It felt like watching a wave form in slow motion just before it crashes. Keep him aligned emotionally. The words were a strategy, not a misunderstanding, not an overreaction. It was a tactic, cold, deliberate, manipulative. And Claire hadn't responded in objection. In fact, she had replied, understood. It's under control. Control. That word like a virus in the bloodstream of my trust. I didn't forward the message, didn't take a screenshot. I saved it, encrypted it, backed it up to a private folder under an untraceable alias. Then I closed my laptop. I walked out of the building, no destination in mind. Just my keys, my coat, and a need to be anywhere else. It was raining when I reached my car. Not soft, romantic rain. Cold, slanted Montreal rain. The kind that seeps into your collar, soaks your socks, makes every inch of your body feel raw. I drove. Out of the city. Past the bridge, past Laval, past places where I'd once considered buying a house with Claire. I pulled into an empty overlook just outside Saint-Jérôme, killed the engine, let the silence fall. My phone buzzed. It was Claire. I didn't answer. I sat still for what felt like hours. My thoughts were looping, but one memory kept pushing forward. My father, the week before he passed. He'd been a carpenter, a quiet man, never good with emotion, but always precise with words. He'd looked at me from his hospital bed, eyes tired, but focused, and said, "Son, if someone loves you, they'll never ask you to pay to prove it. If they make you jump through hoops, it's not love. It's ownership. Ownership." That was what this had been. Not a partnership, not a relationship, an asset acquisition. And I had been too blind to see it, too hopeful, too trusting. But not anymore. Not after this. The rain outside my windshield blurred everything. Lights, lines, trees like a metaphor I didn't need. I wasn't just grieving Claire's betrayal. I was grieving the version of myself that had once needed her approval. And now, he was gone. By Monday morning, I had a plan, not for revenge, not yet. I needed distance clarity, and above all, to act on what I now knew without them suspecting anything had changed. I returned to the city before dawn. Claire had texted 12 times over the weekend. I didn't open any of them. I just replied, "Once I'm okay. I need time." That I knew would buy me some breathing room. She'd interpret it as emotional hurt. She wouldn't suspect strategic recalibration. I walked into Arbor's headquarters and went straight to the IT director, Valerie. She was the only person on the team who had never trusted the Beaulieu partnership. She'd once told me, "Mark data is more loyal than people. Watch what they access, and you'll know what they value." I showed her the Slack export. Her face didn't register shock, just grim confirmation. "They've already requested core system access for Q3 analytics," she said. "If you authorize it, they'll get a mirror of everything." I shook my head. "Don't approve, not until I say otherwise. In fact, flag any movement on that request, from anyone. Then I walked into my own office and began building what I now call the firewall phase. I sent Claire a calendar invite, innocent-sounding Q3 partnership touchpoint, Tuesday, 3 p.m. She accepted within 2 minutes. That Tuesday meeting would not be what she expected. But before that, I had another conversation to initiate one I'd been avoiding for months. Henri had offered to buy a majority stake in Arbor 4 times since January. Each time I'd deflected. Said it wasn't the right moment. Said we needed more infrastructure first. The truth, I didn't want to be owned. But now I needed to hear how he spoke when he thought I was still in his web. I called him. Henri, I've been thinking. Maybe the time is right to revisit that ownership conversation. His tone lit up like a man who had just won a chess match. Marc, I always knew you'd come around. Let's sit down. No pressure, of course, but I think we both know this is the future. I smiled into the phone, not because I agreed, but because now I had the last puzzle piece I needed: his overconfidence. That evening, Claire came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed me lightly, asked if I wanted to order Thai. I said yes. Over dinner, she mentioned that her father had a new approach to the ownership proposal, and that we should really consider it as a shared future. Shared. I nodded. We'll see how the numbers look. No decisions yet. She looked relieved, and I knew they still believed I was in the palm of their hands. The next morning, I did something they would never expect. I met with 2 of Arbor's earliest investors, independent values, driven, and fiercely loyal. I showed them the same document Simon had mistakenly sent me. They didn't need convincing. By noon, we had a new shareholder motion drafted, one that would protect Arbor from acquisition by any entity where clear conflict of interest was evident, including the Beaulieus. It was legal. It was binding. And it was going to be voted on at the emergency board meeting I scheduled for Thursday. Claire still had no idea. I spent that evening reading her text messages again, not out of pain, but out of analysis. What had I missed? What were the signs I'd ignored? Every time I'd asked for clarity about Beaulieu's intentions, she'd deflected with affection. Every time I'd hesitated, she'd given me silence and waited for me to feel guilty enough to close the gap. It wasn't love. It was orchestration. And I wasn't going to play that role anymore. Thursday arrived. I wore the same navy jacket I'd worn the day I pitched Arbor's Series A. There was something symbolic about wearing the garment that had carried my dreams into rooms filled with doubt. Claire arrived with Henri, both smiling. He patted my shoulder. "Big day, Marc. Hope you're ready." I nodded. Always. The meeting began. Claire sat to my right, Henri across from me. I stood. I've called this session to propose a motion one that protects our vision, our independence, and our data integrity. Claire's smile faltered. Henri crossed his arms. I continued. Effective immediately, I move that any acquisition attempt by entities with demonstrated conflict of interest or ethical concerns be deemed invalid under Arbor's governance model. This includes familial entities, where personal relationships compromise decision-making neutrality. Silence. Then murmurs. Valerie seconded the motion. A vote was held. It passed. Unanimously. Henri's face turned the color of wet ash. Claire didn't look at me. Not once. That night, I didn't go home. I packed a bag. Just one. Laptop documents and the watch my father gave me when I turned 25. I checked into a quiet Airbnb near Mont Tremblant. Not to hide. To think. To plan. To rebuild. Not from scratch, but from strength. They thought they could fold me into their legacy. They didn't realize I was already building my own. Friday morning, I returned home. Not to confront Claire, not to explain anything. Just to collect what was mine. The apartment felt different. The air carried that sterile quiet like a hotel room after checkout. Claire wasn't there. Her running shoes were gone. So was her toothbrush. Good. Maybe she'd felt something shifting, or maybe Henri had finally read between the lines. Either way, I didn't care. I walked through each room slowly, not because I was stalling, but because I wanted to see clearly, really see what I'd spent the last 3 years building, what I'd mistaken for a life. Our framed photos sat neatly on the hallway shelf: ski trips, family dinners, her mother's garden party in Charlevoix. I picked up the one from our first trip to the Rockies. She'd laughed so hard she dropped her coffee and blamed the altitude. I placed it face down. In the bedroom, I opened my drawer. Passport laptop charger, 2 journals, and the cufflinks I wore the day Arbor signed its first national contract. I packed them all. Then, almost without thinking, I walked to her side of the closet. Not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. And there it was. A small leather-bound notebook. I opened it. Inside were notes. Not romantic musings or wedding ideas. No. Business notes. Meeting strategies. Behavioral observations about me. Bullet points labeled when to push, when to pull back, how to realign after disagreement. I read one line twice. Remind him of his father's death when he questions loyalty. He responds to emotional grounding. That was it. The final incision. Not betrayal by circumstance, but betrayal by study. I closed the notebook, didn't take it, didn't even move it. It wasn't mine to keep, but I would never forget it. Downstairs, I left my keys on the kitchen counter. 1 house key, 1 mailbox key, and a little brass tag Claire had engraved when we moved in. Marc Plutz, Claire Suite 405. I walked out. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. On the way to the elevator, I passed our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Dubois. She looked at me puzzled. "Claire's not with you," I smiled gently. "Not today." She nodded. "Well, tell her the hydrangeas are blooming." I stepped into the elevator doors, sliding shut between me and everything that used to be home. By noon, I was at the notary's office, filing an address change and restructuring my shareholder status. Everything that tied me to the Beaulieus legally, financially, emotionally was being untangled. Not overnight, but deliberately. Later that afternoon, I sat at a cafe I used to love in Outremont, sipping black coffee, sketching out a new phase for Arbor. One where no one could ever use intimacy as a backdoor into my life's work. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I was awake. And that I've learned is a different kind of power. At around 4, Claire called again. This time I picked up. Her voice was soft, rehearsed. "Marc, we need to talk." "No," I said. Calmly. "We don't." There was a pause. Then, "You're just going to walk away." I looked out the window at a group of teenagers playing frisbee in the park across the street. Claire I already did. She said nothing. So I continued. "Tell Henri he should stop emailing under traceable domains. And next time he wants to manipulate a CTO, he might consider not dating their daughter." Click. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't need one. I turned off my phone. Permanently. As I walked out of the cafe, evening light spilled across the sidewalk. I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt light. Not because the weight had disappeared, but because I'd stopped carrying what never belonged to me. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't victory. It was release. And I had earned it. Monday morning, I wore a navy suit, not for performance, but for precision. I was no longer Marc the partner, Marc the romantic, or Marc the trusting CTO. Today, I was Marc Arbor founder and majority shareholder of Arbor Systems. I walked into our Montreal headquarters with a USB drive in my pocket and a board meeting on the calendar. I hadn't said much since Friday. That was intentional. Silence lets arrogance grow comfortable, and when power is comfortable, it slips, shows its belly. I took the elevator to the 10th floor, our executive suite. The boardroom glass glinted in the morning sun. Our CFO, Laurent, was already seated sipping espresso. To his right, Alina, our head of legal. Across from her sat 2 independent directors and 1 observer from the Federal Innovation Fund. All had been looped into this emergency meeting under the title Security Breach Protocol and Partnership Evaluation. I greeted them with nods. No warm handshakes, no small talk. I placed my laptop on the table, connected the HDMI cable, and opened a single-file strategic alignment. Beaulieu draft.docx. The screen lit up. Silence fell. "Let's begin," I said. No preamble, no emotion, just data. I walked them through the full transcript, Henry's private message to Claire, Claire's reply, the behavioral annotations from her notebook, the pressure to align emotionally, the quote about my father, the strategy to use grief as leverage. I let every line sit for 5 seconds. 5 seconds of silence after each quote, enough to sting, to digest, to register. Alina's jaw tightened. Laurent scribbled notes like his pen was on fire. One of the independent directors muttered, "Unethical doesn't begin to describe it." Then came the slide titled, "Ownership versus Partnership." I didn't explain it, just 1 bullet. "If you want my brain, you invest in it. You don't court it like a teenager, then co-opt it, like a trophy." I closed the laptop. "This is what we're dealing with," I said. "This is the partner we've built our Phase 3 with. I brought the Beaulieu Group into our ecosystem in good faith. Claire was meant to be a bridge. Turns out she was a Trojan horse." The fund observer cleared his throat. "Do you have evidence this strategy was sanctioned by Henri himself?" I nodded. "Yes. Metadata from the original file shows author ID registered to Henri Beaulieu's corporate license. And we've cross-verified with internal Slack server logs." Alina added, "Legally. It's enough to classify as coordinated manipulation and breach of contractual good faith." No one spoke for a beat. I pressed on. "Which brings us to resolution. Effective immediately, I'm terminating all collaboration with Beaulieu Group. Claire Beaulieu is barred from all Arbor-related systems communications or initiatives. Her access credentials have already been revoked." Gasps. Laurent glanced at me. "That includes the textile logistics pipeline." "Yes," I said. "We'll rebuild it. Without them." The fund observer raised an eyebrow. "That could delay Phase 3 by a quarter." "Better a delay than a hijack," I replied. Then I pulled out a second USB. "This drive contains our contingency plan partnership offers from Borealis Tech and Cascadia Materials. Both vetted, both eager, both ethical." I slid the USB across the table. "This is our new roadmap." By the time I left the boardroom, there were no objections, only stunned silence and respect. I went to my office, shut the door, and stared at the skyline. Then I did one last thing. I picked up my phone and dialed Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Marc." Her voice sounded guarded, nervous. Maybe she already knew what had unfolded. "I didn't waste time." "You sold me for $750,000, I said evenly. She inhaled sharply. "But you lost something far more valuable," I cut in. My silence. She didn't respond. I continued. "I didn't send your father to prison. I didn't press charges. I didn't call reporters. I didn't post a thread on X. All I did was remove your influence." Silence again. "You'll still be Claire Beaulieu," I said. "But you won't be the woman behind Arbor Systems. And believe me, people will notice the difference." Click. I ended the call before she could say another word. I stared at the phone, then set it down. No shaking, no bitterness, just clarity. Later that evening, Alina called. We received a withdrawal notice from Beaulieu Group. They've removed their bid to co-host the Atlantic AI Summit. I smiled faintly. "Good." Also, she added, "We've had 3 messages from media outlets. Word is spreading." "Let them speculate," I said. "Let silence tell the story." I stood by the window as dusk settled over the city. Somewhere below, people were hurrying home, chasing warmth, chasing dinner, chasing routine. But I wasn't chasing anymore. I was choosing. Choosing who had access to me. Choosing who had power over me. And choosing, for the first time in a long time, to play the long game. Not out of revenge. Out of self-respect. They'd tried to own me. Now they would learn, you cannot own what you underestimated. That night I didn't sleep. Not out of rage. Not grief. It was something quieter. Like my mind had finally gone still, so still it echoed. I sat in my apartment, lights dimmed, a single lamp on beside the bookshelf Claire had once helped me assemble. The same shelf that now held a ceramic bowl from a Quebec City market, 2 signed contracts with government grants, and a book on Stoic philosophy my father gave me years ago. I sat down at the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and began typing a letter I never intended to send. Claire, you may never read this, and even if you do, I don't expect you to understand it. I'm not writing out of spite, not out of love either, just out of closure. I used to think betrayal came with fire, with raised voices, accusations, broken glasses on tile floors. But yours came like snowfall, silent, accumulating, while I looked the other way. Until one day, I was buried in it. I reread that message from your father. And your reply. It's under control. That phrase still sits in my chest like gravel. I wonder if you ever thought about what it would feel like being on the receiving end of that kind of manipulation. If you ever paused before hitting send. Or if it had already become muscle memory strategy before empathy. You played a role. That's clear now. You weren't a bystander. You were a participant. Maybe even a believer. And that stings more than I expected. Because I remember the night you told me you loved my conviction. My values. The way I refused to compromise. Turns out that was the part you most wanted to modify. I won't say I was perfect. God, I wasn't. I overlooked things. I brushed past red flags like how you always said our goals, but only mentioned your family's name. How your praise often came with corrections. How partnership slowly started to feel like performance. But love makes fools of us all. The difference is, some of us try to love with both hands. Others love with one hand and keep the other on the lever. You chose the lever. And when I found out, I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. I just walked away. Not because I was weak, but because I refused to stay in a room where I'm being studied like a lab rat. You told yourself you were protecting me from your father's wrath. Maybe that's true. Maybe in your head you thought you were buffering me. But here's the thing. No love is real if it requires translation between loyalties. If I'm not your family, I'm a client. And I don't date vendors. So here's what you lost. Not access, not status, not a contract. You lost the version of me who believed you were different. You lost the man who would have gone to hell and back if you had just said, I need you to choose me. And you never did. That choice was never on the table. You made sure of it. Now it's mine. And I'm choosing myself. Not as revenge, as preservation. Because I am no longer interested in being a subplot in the Beaulieu empire. And more importantly, I am no longer asking for a seat at a table I helped design. Goodbye, Claire. Not angrily. Just finally. Mark. I stared at the screen for a long while after finishing. Then I saved the document in a folder called Unsent, Undone, and closed the laptop. Outside, the city was hushed. A late April frost shimmered under the streetlights. Spring was here, but not yet warm. Just enough to remind you that transformation is often cold before it's beautiful. I poured a glass of water, walked to the window, and watched a cyclist pass under a flickering traffic light. Somewhere, people were falling asleep, texting partners, brushing teeth, making promises. Ordinary lives continuing. Mine would too. But with new boundaries, new filters, new laws not written in contracts, but in experience. Because if betrayal is a map, then healing is the route we choose after burning it. I took a deep breath, exhaled through my nose. It no longer hurt the same. Not because it didn't matter, but because now I did. I used to believe legacy was something passed down. Now I know it's something we choose to leave behind. 2 months after walking away from Claire and Beaulieu Group, I registered a foundation. A quiet launch. No press conference, no ribbon cutting. Just a document filed, a mission statement uploaded, and a single name on the founding charter. No Dowry Capital Canada. The name turned heads. That was intentional. It wasn't about shocking anyone. It was about making a statement that couldn't be softened or spun. No more code switching. No more political correctness to appease gatekeepers in tailored suits. This was mine. I funded it with a portion of the exit package from Arbor Systems. My team had offered a generous buyout, assuming I'd disappear into early retirement or pivot into consulting. Instead, I built something I never had. A chance for people who looked like I once did, talented, undercapitalized, and constantly being asked, who else is backing you? That question was the quiet killer of dreams. I remembered pitching investors 5 years ago, standing in glass boardrooms where smiles didn't reach eyes, where compliments were a form of delay. They wanted pedigree, family names, de-risked founders they called them, translation people with rich parents. Not this time. At No Dowry Capital, we don't ask about your parents. We don't ask what school your spouse went to, or whether your cousin sits on a corporate board. We ask one thing: what problem are you obsessed with solving? That's it. Every founder we back signs what we call the Freedom Clause. It protects them from equity manipulation by family partners or legacy institutions. It ensures they have legal guidance independent from outside influence. It guarantees their first investor won't be their first controller. It's a firewall against manipulation disguised as mentorship. By the 3rd month, we had our first cohort, 7 founders. 3 of them women, 2 non-binary. One of them, Shazia, was a single mom from Scarborough, building a hardware-software stack for remote diagnosis in underfunded clinics. She didn't pitch like someone with media training. She pitched like someone who had sat next to a dying parent and wanted to stop that from happening to anyone else. She got a full seed round, no compromises. I met with every founder in person, not because I needed to, but because I remembered what it felt like when someone finally looked me in the eye and said, "You're not crazy for dreaming this big." That sentence had changed my life. Now I handed it forward, and something unexpected started to happen. The press found out. They ran a profile on No Dowry Capital, not because I asked them to, but because someone had leaked Shazia's product launch. The article went viral. A photo of me in a navy sweater, arms crossed in front of an unbranded wall. No Beaulieu ties, no corporate logo. Just a single quote beneath the headline: "Not every legacy has to be inherited. Some are built from scratch." Within a week, I received over 300 messages, not from VCs, not from incubators, from strangers, founders, mothers, teachers, even a truck driver from Alberta who wrote, "I've never tried to start a company, but reading what you're doing makes me feel like maybe I could." That one stayed with me, not because of the content, but because of the tone. Hope, raw and unscripted. That was legacy. It wasn't a last name on a plaque. It was giving someone a map when no one gave you one. It was proving that you didn't have to trade your soul for a check. It was being the first door, not just the loudest one. And in the middle of all that, during a rainy morning in May, someone showed up at my office. Unannounced. A woman. Tall, neat blazer eyes that didn't blink much. She introduced herself, Annick Dufour. The name rang a bell. She smiled. I was engaged to Louis Beaulieu, Claire's brother. Suddenly, it clicked. Louis, the golden child of Beaulieu Group, groomed to take over until he moved to France and vanished from corporate circles. I remembered whispers. The one who broke off an engagement, someone once said. She couldn't handle the pressure, another had added. Annick looked around the space, bare brick walls, post-its on windows, a smell of burned coffee and ambition. She nodded once. You did what I couldn't. I didn't respond. She continued. I walked away from him, but I didn't walk away from them. I kept going back, trying to prove I could belong on my own terms, until I broke. She opened her purse, pulled out a small envelope. Don't worry, it's not a lawsuit, she said dryly. It's a check. For the foundation. I've done well since. You made it easier to believe I wasn't crazy. I took it numbly. She walked toward the door, then turned. Mark, I hope you never go back, not even for closure. Some buildings just need to be demolished. Then she was gone. And I stood there, holding a check signed in green ink, wondering how many people like Annick had been buried under the rubble of systems built on legacy lineage and quiet control. That night, I updated the website. Under our mission, I added a new line. We are not here to join the table. We are here to build new rooms. I shut the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat still for a while. Some part of me still missed Claire, not the woman, but the possibility she once represented. But the ache was different now. It didn't burn. It instructed. The article came out in the Globe and Mail. Someone sent me the link early in the morning. No subject line, just the URL. I knew before clicking what it would be about. Claire. Her photo took up half the screen. She was standing in front of Beaulieu's new flagship center in Vancouver, crisp beige trench coat, hair pinned, smile calculated. The headline read, From Heritage to Horizons, Claire Beaulieu on Evolving Legacy. The irony almost made me laugh. I skimmed through the introduction. Phrases like modernizing tradition, championing diversity, and redefining leadership were scattered across the page like confetti. No one cared to clean up. Then came the quote that stopped me. People think legacy is static, but it's not. It's adaptable, just like love. When we shape others for their own good, it isn't control. It's care in motion. I reread that twice. Care in motion. That's what she was calling it now. Gaslighting repackaged as generosity. They even brought up the arbor split. Claire didn't name me directly, of course, but when the interviewer asked about the recent fallout with a promising Montreal-based firm, her expression softened just enough for the camera. Some founders, they struggle with scale. Sometimes they confuse autonomy with resistance. We tried our best to support him, but not everyone's ready to be part of something bigger than themselves. I didn't feel anger. I expected that. What struck me, what sat heavy in my ribs, was how easily she slid into the language of victimhood while still clutching the steering wheel. She wasn't defending herself. She was erasing me, turning truth into inconvenience, turning me into a footnote. What she didn't know, what the article didn't mention, was that the Arbor Board had already backed No Dowry Capital, quietly, fully, even added our model to their own DEI framework. Claire thought she had burned a bridge. She didn't realize I'd used the ashes to pave a new road. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't ask for corrections. But I did get a call from Etienne, a longtime legal advisor in Quebec City, who had once done small compliance audits for Beaulieu. He said, I just read the piece. Are you okay? I told him I was more than okay. He laughed. You know, he said, She reminds me of those old French chateaux, elegant from afar, but if you press your hand to the wall, the stone's already crumbling. That stayed with me, because deep down, I knew Claire was no longer dangerous to me. She was dangerous to herself, and to anyone who still believed charm was the same as integrity. I kept reading the piece almost like I needed to see it through, like watching the credits of a film you've already memorized. Toward the end, the interviewer asked Claire about her personal growth since the Arbor fallout. Her answer, I've learned that not every person can handle being challenged by someone they love. That was the final pivot. She made it sound like I'd been fragile, threatened by her strength. But I wasn't threatened. I was betrayed. There's a difference, and she knew it. That afternoon, I walked to the corner cafe where I used to meet her during our first dates. It hadn't changed much. Same chalkboard menu, same overwatered potted plants. I ordered a black coffee, no milk, and sat by the window. The barista asked if I needed anything else. I said, no, I've got everything I need. Because I did. Not money, not closure, just peace. Peace and a clean page. Because while Claire was still rehearsing the same story with new vocabulary, I had already started writing a different one that didn't include her as antagonist, or me as victim. Just purpose, just movement, just something real. It happened in Toronto, at the Elevate Tech Conference, one of those events where startup founders, investors, and media collide in a blur of lanyards, name badges, and overly energetic panel discussions. I was there to speak on a panel titled Equity Beyond Capital. I just stepped off stage, still answering questions from a small group of university students, when I spotted him. Henri Beaulieu. He stood near the entrance to the VIP lounge, arms crossed, talking to someone I didn't recognize. His hair was grayer than I remembered, a little thinner too. But the posture, upright, precise, controlled, that hadn't changed. He saw me before I could turn away. He excused himself from the conversation, adjusted his cuffs, and started walking toward me with a look I knew too well composed, but hunting for dominance. I didn't move, didn't shrink, didn't prepare a monologue. When he stopped in front of me, I gave him a polite nod. "Marc," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled. "You should have." He hesitated. That small crack in confidence, it was new. "I've been following your fund," he continued. "Interesting thesis. Ambitious. Ambitious. As if ambition was something to be noted with concern, not possibility." "I'm not doing it for applause," I replied, "and definitely not for your validation." He blinked. I could see it, the need to regain footing. "Claire told me you're still bitter." There it was. The old Henri, using someone else's voice to land his punches. I didn't flinch. "I'm not bitter," I said calmly. "I'm building. You mistook my silence for defeat. It wasn't." He shifted his weight, voice lowering. "You know you walked away from a legacy, one that could have made you." I cut him off. "No, Henri, I walked away from manipulation disguised as mentorship, from being groomed, not partnered. And if that's your definition of legacy, I want no part of it." For a second, his mouth opened, maybe to defend, maybe to threaten, but then he closed it. I turned to leave, but paused. "By the way, I added your son's ex-fiancée, Amélie. She's now leading a 10-mailer climate innovation fund. You should look her up sometime. Turns out the women you underestimated. They didn't need your last name to matter." His face froze. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked away past the stage, past the cameras, out into the early evening air. Outside, I took a long breath, not because I was shaken, but because I was free. Free from the need to prove anything to the Beaulieu name. Free from the grip of false narratives of second-guessing myself around people who confused tradition with entitlement. As I stood there, phone in hand, a young founder approached me. "Mr. Desrochers," she asked. I turned. She looked nervous, maybe 25, holding a pitch deck with shaking fingers. Can I ask how you knew when to walk away? I didn't hesitate. When I realized staying meant shrinking. She nodded slowly. And just like that, I knew. This was legacy. Not a surname on a building, not a seat at someone else's table, but showing others how to build their own. I no longer measure success by the rooms I enter, or the names printed beside mine on a glossy event program. I measure it in something quieter, like the voice of a young founder who tells me she pitched her idea without apologizing for her ambition. Like the father who emailed me last month saying, "My daughter watched your interview." She finally believes she can build something without marrying into it. That used to be me thinking love had to come with permission slips that worth was granted, not claimed. Now I know better. Claire never called again, and I never reached out. Some things don't need closure. They just need distance. As for Henri, he faded. Beaulieu Group's grip on the startup ecosystem loosened. Investors learned that legacy isn't about preserving the past. It's about making room for the future. Every time I write a check to a founder who's been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, I remember what it felt like, sitting alone in my car, rain pouring down, realizing I'd been traded like stock. But I didn't stay there. I turned betrayal into blueprint, pain into principle, and silence into action. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been told you don't belong, or that you're only valuable when convenient, walk away. Not to run, not to retreat, but to reclaim. And when you're ready, build something that cannot be taken from you. That's the work I'm still doing. Not because I need to prove anything, but because I've finally stopped needing to.